Toronto Transit System, the better way. It is a system that 2.65 million people use daily. Every day, people take the Toronto Transit Commission to go to work, go to school, or many more, like going to a special event. For some people living outside of Toronto, they rely on other transit systems to get to Toronto so that they can use the TTC to get to their destinations. The TTC is vital. When the 2003 Northeast blackout happened in Toronto, commuters were struggling to get around the city. It reminded us about how important why we need the TTC. The Toronto Transit Commission operates transit buses, streetcars, paratransit, and rapid transit services. Established in 1921, the TTC comprises 4 rapid transit lines, over 149 bus routes, and 11 streetcar lines, of which 148 routes makes 243 connections with a rapid transit station during weekday rush hours. The TTC operates the third most heavily used urban mass transit system in North America, after the New York City Transit Authority and Mexico City Metro. The TTC employed 12,449 personnel as of December 31st, 2011. Throughout the years, the TTC went through its times that were high quality,
it's out with the old and in with the new,
and the times that were appalling.
People want subways, folks. Subways, subways. They don't want these damn streetcars blocking up our city.
But when Torontonians think about the TTC, the first thing that comes into their mind is the underground. Underground are vehicles that has 6 cars, travel to 88 kilometers an hour, and runs on rails. Is the TTC subway system, one of the most eye-catching icons in Toronto. Though of both underground and elevated railway lines, it was Canada's first completed subway system. The subway and RT encompasses 4 lines and 69 stations on 68.3 kilometers of track, with 6 more stations and 8.6 kilometers scheduled to open in fall 2016. The TTC sometimes used the term rapid transit internally to describe all 4 lines, but in public usage they call it subway lines, with the exception of the Scarborough RT, which is commonly called the RT. Day by day, people use the subways to get from point A to point B. Some people get on the subway and get off at their destination at the same subway line. But for others who travel to a lot of places, such as downtown Toronto, they would have to transfer to another line at an interchange station, such as Yonge and Blair station, the busiest station on the system. During the rush hours, it could be pretty squeezy. It is hard to imagine what life would be without these subways. It would be a treacherous disaster. But there was actually one time when the subways did not existed. There was a time when only buses and streetcars were the only way. But the TTC knew that they needed another form of transportation so that people could get around the city faster. How did the TTC create the subway system? And how did it manage to expand for 60 years? It wasn't until 1849 when Toronto had its first public transit company, the Williams Omnibus Bus Line, owned by furniture maker and undertaker Burt Williams. It carried passengers in horse-drawn stagecoaches via King and Yonge Street, between the St. Lawrence Market and the village of Yorkville. The price of each trip was 6 pence. In 1861, a 30-year franchise for a street railway was given to Alexander Easton. The company operated under the name of the Toronto Street Railway, TSR. In 1891, the TSR franchise was not renewed. After a few months of municipal operation, a 30-year franchise was granted to William Mackenzie's Toronto Railway Company, TRC. The TRC was required to replace horse-drawn streetcars with electric ones by 1894. For their introduction, streetcars were only allowed to operate 6 days a week, as a blue law prohibited their use on Sundays. This was upheld by an 1892 referendum, but a second referendum in 1897 overturned the law by a narrow margin, and the first subway streetcars ran on May 16th of that year. In 1885, north of the city, a franchise was granted to the Metropolitan Street Railway, MSR. Outside of the city, transit connections to the suburbs were provided by interurban lines, known in Ontario as radial railways because their lines radiated from the city. These include the Toronto and New York Radial Railway and the Toronto Suburban Railway. Prior to the establishment of the TTC, the City of Toronto operated a city-owned system under the Toronto Civic Railway name, which was created to serve areas to which the Toronto Railways Company did not. In 1920, a provincial act created the Toronto Transportation Commission, and with the expiration of the TRC's franchise in 1921, the Commission took over and amalgamated 9 existing fare systems within the city limits. Between 1921 and 1953, the TTC added 35 new routes in the city and extended 20 more. It also operated 23 suburban routes on a service-for-cost basis. It abandoned the profitable North Yonge Railway's radial railway line. The Great Depression and World War II both placed heavy burdens on the ability of municipalities to financial themselves. During most of the 1930s, municipal governments had to cope with the general welfare costs and assistance to the employed. The TTC realized that improvements had to be made despite the Depression, and in 1936, purchase of the first of the newly developed PCC streetcars. The war put an end to the Depression and increased migration from rural to urban areas. After the war, municipalities faced the problem of extending services to accommodate the increased population. Ironically, the one municipal service to propose during the war years was public transit. Employers had to stagger work hours in order to avoid overcrowding the streetcars. Toronto continued their program of purchasing PCC streetcars, running the world's largest fleet, including many obtained second-hand from US cities that abandoned streetcar service. Public transit was one of the essential services identified by Metropolitan Toronto's founders in 1953. On January 1, 1954, the Toronto Transportation Commission has renamed the Toronto Transit Commission, and public transit was placed under the jurisdiction of the new municipality of Metropolitan Toronto. The assets of the liabilities of the TTC and 4 independent bus lines operating in the suburbs were acquired by the Commission. In 1954, the TTC became the sole provider of public transportation services in Metro Toronto. The TTC formed a rapid transit department and worked on the proposal between 1942 and 1946. Finally, the TTC proposed a rapid transit subway beneath Yonge Street, running from Eglinton Avenue south to Front Street, and then west along Front Street to Union Station. A Queen streetcar subway would operate to the north of Queen Street from Trinity Park to McCall, beneath Queen Street from McCall to Mutual, and then north of Queen Street in an open cut from Neutral to St. Paul. The matter was put into voters on a January 1st, 1946 plebiscite and overwhelmingly approved. Toronto City Council approved construction 4 months later. However, the proposed federal funding never materialized. Although the Federal Minister of Reconstruction, C.D. Ho, sent a letter on October 3, 1945, promising the TTC financial assistance, the deal fell through when the federal government and the province of Ontario failed to agree on a post-war employment program that would support the project. The Queen Streetcar Subway was temporarily forgotten, and what had begun as a 2-subway project costing $42.3 million has reduced to a single line costing an estimated $28.9 million plus $3.5 million for rolling stock. Today, evidence of the Queen Streetcar Subway could be seen through this door at Queen Subway Station. The city, however, proceeded with the subway anyway, scaling down the proposal. Construction of the Yonge subway began on September 8, 1949, with the City of Toronto launching work with a ceremony emceed by Monty Hall.
It is 11 o'clock on the morning of September the 8th, 1949. Hundreds of Toronto citizens pause briefly today and give thought to tomorrow. The Lieutenant Governor of Ontario sets in motion a massive machine. Its ponderous thrusts hammer a hymn of progress. Its tempo salutes today's foresight. Machines and men move into action. The heartbeat of the city accelerates. Here you can actually see the metropolis grow and expand. See it march forward to new greatness, to increasing stature.
It was official. Toronto was going to have its first subway. The first in Canadian history.
Now have you heard what's going on in Toronto? They're digging deeper, deeper, deeper every day. Store proprietors are raving while they're tearing up the paving. The racket is nerve-wracking, so they say. And though the noise may be distressing, still construction is progressing, and we can't afford a further delay. So with the help of you and me and the blessed TTC, we'll soon have a real subway.
Yes, we're gonna have a subway in Toronto. We gotta get the working man on pronto. So bear the noise with a smile, and in a little while we'll be riding in the new subway.
Now it's generally conceded that a subway here is needed, for the people have to get to work each day.
Cut and cover technique was chosen as the means to build the underground portions of the 7.4 kilometer line. This was chosen because it was far less expensive than using a tunnel bore. A large trench was dug into Yonge Street, utilities relocated, and the steel cross members welded into place. These steel cross members were then used to support heavy timbers that provided a deck that allowed traffic to return to the street while work proceeded beneath. A total of 1.3 million cubic meters of material were removed, and some 12,700 meter tons of reinforcing steel and 1.4 million bags of cement were put into place. The material removed was trucked into Ashbridges Bay and was used to create acres of new land out of Lake Ontario. Initially, it was expected that the Yonge subway would be finished in 1953, but the Korean War intervened. The resulting steel shortage dragged the work on until 1954. The final cost of the Yonge subway was tailed at $67 million. With the construction of the subway well underway, the TTC set about searching for an equipment to operate on it. They turned, first of all, to New York and Chicago, two large cities with well-established or developing subway networks. In particular, they seriously considered Chicago's 6000 series PCC rapid transit cars, built by St. Louis Car Company using components salvaged from 4000 series Chicago PCC streetcars. Early drawings from the Yonge subway showed trains comprised from cars about as long as PCCs and in roughly the same color scheme. As it had founded when it tried to purchase new PCCs in the early 1950s, the price tag of the PCC-style subway cars was too high for the TTC's liking, both from Canadian and United States car builders, and the commission went further afield. They finally set upon the Gloucester's Railway Carriage and Wagon Company in Gloucester, England, purchasing technology similar to what has been run on the London Underground. The first order of the Toronto's first subway cars were placed in November 1951 for a total of 104 units. The original contract price was $7,800,000, included separate parts. The first cars arrived in Port of Montreal in 1953, loaded on flat cars and taken by rail to Hillcrest shops. Further deliveries of Gloucester cars were made directly to Davisville Yard via the CN siding that was all that remained in the Belt Line Railway. Cars 5004 and 5005 were the first to travel under their own power on September 20th, 1953. Further trips were made in October of that year to check tunnel clearance. After 5 years of construction and preparation, the Yonge subway was ready to open. Ceremonies were planned for the morning of March 30th, 1954.
Torontonians are ready to celebrate S Day in the Queen City, finale to a $59 million project. Dream of almost half a century, the Toronto subway's 4.6-mile line is ready for customers. Very proud of today's event is TTC's Chairman McBride, who has headed the commission since 1933. Construction started in 1949. Now Ontario's Premier Leslie Frost is ready to throw the symbolic green light, assisted by Toronto's Mayor Alan Lamport. Distinguished guests board the special train for the initial run down the line. Premier Frost is at the controls. Part of the subway runs through an open cut. Track hangers on the first train include Metro Mayor Gardner and Toronto's Mayor Lamport. Including Eglinton Avenue, the starting point, and Union Station, the terminal, the train runs through 12 ultra-automatic stations. At the end of its history-making trip, the official party leaves the train to watch Premier Frost unveil a plaque commemorating the occasion and reminding future generations of the day Toronto's first subway opened.
The Yonge streetcar line, established in 1861, faded from existence between 11:30 p.m. and 2 p.m. that afternoon. Earlier that month, the line had been cut back from Toronto's northern city limits to Eglinton Avenue, looping counterclockwise around the traffic office at Eglinton Car House. So thereafter, the TTC crews worked on installing trolleybus overhead for a new route to run from Eglinton Station to the city limits. Now, the last streetcars dropped from passengers at Union Station and filled the Harbour Yard at the base of York Street. The last northbound streetcar left front in York for Eglinton at 11:54 p.m. And the very last train, a special compromise of width 2574 and trailer 2897, departed Eglinton for Front Street at 2:30 p.m. Signs proclaiming it to be the last train were so large that most of the invited party of members of the Upper Canada Railroad Society rode in a trailer so they could be able to see out. For many of the cars, it would be the last time they would operate. The Yonge subway meant the end of service not only for Toronto's premier streetcar line, but also for the Bay streetcar line, as the St. Clair services were realigned into the subway. The church streetcars operated for almost 2 months after the opening, but was bused on May 16, 1954 to reduce the TTC electronical demands. The higher than expected electrical demands from the Yonge subway was blamed for a number of brownouts in the area. Tracks were soon taken up or covered up over on Front Street from York to Sherborne. A large number of wits were rendered surplus as a result to these changes. The TTC retired every wit trailer and all remaining two-man Peter Witt cars. Many were taken from the harbour yard directly to the scrap heap. A lot of time had to be spent fixing Yonge Street in the aftermath of the subway opening and the streetcar abandonment. The rehabilitation of the Toronto's main thoroughfare continued throughout 1954, with tracks either being removed or paved over. A Yonge Street opening ceremony was scheduled for October 20th, 1954, but then Hurricane Hazel intervened. Although technically only a tropical depression by the time it hit Toronto, this disaster still caused over $24 million in property damage and killed more than 80 Torontonians. The reopening ceremony was quickly reorganized into a fundraising event to assist the storm victims. The Yonge subway, however, was an overnight success. Riders flocked to try out the line, and commuters continued to use it long after the novelty wore off. Two-car Gloucester trains that were supposed to operate during periods of low ridership became very uncommon. Four-car trains became the minimum, and six-car trains standard in service. Eventually, ridership increased to the point where 8-car Gloucester trains operated from Monday through Sunday, from the early morning to the early evening. By 1960, the Toronto Transit Commission was preparing to expand its subway system to include the University Line. The TTC wanted subway cars with a larger 22.86 meters design and also wished to expand upon some of the experimental features in the existing G-Series cars. The new design was pushed forward by GM John G. Inglis. The TTC performed testing at St. Clair and Union stations with a 22.86 meters testing vehicle known as the Duncan Dragon, built by the Duncan Shops by Len Bardsley and the D&D equipment. After specifications for the new cars were finalized, Alco's Montreal Locomotive Works was contracted to build the new cars, dubbed M1. The cars were historically notable as the first Canadian-built subway cars, and at the time of their construction, were the longest subway cars in the world. All subsequent TTC cars had followed the size and length specifications of the M series and influenced several other transit authorities to examine the use of longer cars. In 1963, an extension was added to curve north of Union Station below University Avenue and Queen's Park to near Bloor Street, where it turned west to terminate at St. George and Bloor Street. Now that the University line was open, pretty soon the Bloor-Danforth line would be part of the TTC. The earliest mention of a rapid transit along the Bloor-Danforth line's route was made in a 1910s report that was prepared by an American firm of transit consultants. This study had been commissioned by a special commission which include a city councillor, Horatio Clarence Hawken, and Mayor of Toronto, Joseph Oliver. In their final report, the consultants suggested that the Prince Edward Viaduct, which spans the Don Valley Parkway, should include a lower deck for a future subway. The lower deck was built, but the first plan for a line to use it was not made until June 15, 1933, when the TTC published a report which suggested a construction of a subway and an expressway broadly following Bloor Street and Danforth Avenue. The estimated cost for the project was $120 million, but the plan was not implemented. Plans for a somewhat longer route running east to west from Victoria Park Avenue to the Humber River were proposed by the Toronto Planning Board in December 1943, although the report did not include the costings. During the fall of 1911, the City of Toronto put out a tender for the construction of the concrete tubes to carry a subway. However, when the cost of the subway was put into a referendum, the construction of the subway tunnels was rejected. Before the subway was built, the TTC operated streetcars along the route between Jane Street and Luttrell Avenue. Paired PCC streetcars, or multiple units, operated from 1950 to the opening of the subway line in 1966. The TTC favored this route because the Prince Edward Viaduct made it easier to build a subway across the Don Valley, and the streetcar that ran along the route was filled with passengers traveling from East York and Scarborough. To provide relief for this streetcar line and to make it easier to expand into the suburbs, the line was built under Bloor Street and Danforth Avenue. The opening of the Yonge subway in 1954 resulted in another plan by the TTC for a Bloor-Danforth line, this time without an expressway, costing $146 million. The line was approved but was not built. In the 1950s, there was an intense debate over where the second Toronto subway line would run, as it would affect how bus routes in Toronto suburbs would operate. There were two main plans. While both shared the same route at the outer ends, the TTC favored a route that would continue eastwards from Christie Station to Pape Station. This plan was championed by the TTC chairman Alan A. Lamport, and also included an extension from the Yonge line from Union Station northwards to meet the new line at St. George Station. The other plan, which was proposed by the city's planning department and endorsement by its chairman, Fred Gardner, had a large U-shaped. From Christie, it ran south to Queen Street west, and following Queen Street eastwards to Pape Street, turned north to rejoin the east-west route at Pape Station. In 1956, Toronto's midtown areas was starting to experience growth. There was a public debate about the two schemes between the two chairmen and the municipalities that made up Metropolitan Toronto. The extension of the Yonge line along University Avenue and the east-west Bloor-Danforth line extension were authorized on September 5, 1958 by the Ontario Municipal Board, which sought and comprised between the involved communities. But before the Bloor-Danforth line was open, the TTC was working on getting new subway cars called Hawker Cylinder Canada H1. The subway cars built in 1965 and 66 are aluminum body cars, classified as RT75 by their builder, but known as the H1s by the TTC. The H1s were part of the 200 car order, along with the M1 cars from the competitor Montreal Locomotive Works for combined Bloor-Danforth University line services. They were first delivered in 1965. The H1s were the first cars to be controlled by way of single controller for acceleration and braking. The Bloor-Danforth line opened from Keele Station in the west to Woodbine Station in the east on February 26, 1966. 9 men died during its construction. Most of the line is underground and built using the cut and cover method, with some sections building using a tunnel boring machine. Other parts of the line are above ground in grade separated rail corridors. The line was 12.9 kilometers long and ran alongside Bloor Street and Danforth Avenue. For 6 months, the subway was opened as a single system, with trains from Eglinton Station running through either to Keele or Woodbine, while other trains connected to latter 2 points. The experiment was deemed a failure, largely because delays anywhere quickly cascaded to affect the entire system. Also, as the stations had not been laid out effectively for cross-platform interchange, trains traveling west from St. George and east of Bay Station alternated between 2 levels, leading passengers to wait on the stairs in between the levels, since they were unable to tell which platform would receive the next train. After this, the 2 lines were permanently segregated, leaving Lower Bay Station abandoned. Lower Bay and the tracks leading to it still exist and now used to train new operators to move trains between the 2 current lines for platform service experiments and to allow filming in the subway without disrupting public service. The extensions from Islington Station in the west and Warden Station in the east opened simultaneously on May 11, 1968. Now it's the 70s, and once again, the TTC was working on getting new subway cars, the Hawker Siddeley Canada H2. The subway cars were built in 1971. They were once again aluminum body cars, classified as RT75 by their builder, but known as the H2 by the TTC. The H2s were basically identical to the earlier H1 series cars, but with some minor changes such as cab control improvements, traction motors, and interior color. They were ordered to expand the fleet for the North Yonge and planned Spadina extensions. As the fleet was being delivered, cars 5500 and 5505 were reclassified as H3s when they were equipped with Hitachi chopper control equipment. They were evaluated in 1973 and lasted until 1984 when they were converted back to H2s. The 88 H4 cars were ordered in 1973 and delivered between 1974 and 1975. They were similar to the previous H2 subway cars, however had reduced seating to a 2+2 configuration instead of a 2+3 to allow for more standees. The H4 cars were the last non-air-conditioned subway cars in the TTC fleet and were the last to use camshaft control. On March 31, 1973, the line was extended north to York Mill Station and the next year to Finch Station as a part of the North Yonge Extension project, bringing the subway to North York. A station at Glencairn and Yonge was considered for the North Yonge Extension in the late 1960s and early 70s. However, this was dropped along with Glen Echo Station at Yonge Boulevard because of budgetary concerns. If built, it would have been placed between Eglinton and Lawrence stations on the Yonge line. In 1976, Christie Station was damaged when a fire was set on aboard a late evening train. Nobody was hurt, but 4 cars of the train were destroyed and a part of the station platform area, including the tile wall, suffered severe damage. During the repair, parts of the trim were replaced with a different color, red-brown, instead of the original green tile. During the same year, the Hawker Siddeley Canada H5 subway cars were built. built between 1976 and 1979. The cars primarily serve the Yonge University Spadina line and are based out of the Wilson and Davisville yards, although they were not regularly scheduled to operate on the Bloor-Danforth line. Occasionally, spare trains of H5 cars will make it onto that line. A further 9.9 kilometer was added to the Yonge University line in 1978 when it was extended from St. George and Bloor, running north and northwest to Eglinton Avenue and William R. Allen Road, then north along the median of the Allen Road to Wilson Avenue. This extension was originally proposed as a part of the Spadina Expressway, but when the expressway portion south of Eglinton Avenue was cancelled after massive protests, the subway was still built following the original route through Cedarville Ravine. Hence, it's called the Spadina Subway Line, though it follows Spadina Road for less than 2 kilometers. On November 21, 1980, the line was extended to the current terminal stations of Kipling Station in the west and Kennedy Station in the east. From Kennedy, a new line was planned from Kennedy to McCowan Road. But it wasn't going to be a subway line. Instead, it was going to be a rapid transit line, a line that was going to have above ground and at ground level. Before this line was built, there were some major plans. In 1972, the provincial government announced the Go Urban plan to build an intermediate capacity transit system across the suburban Toronto using the experimental Cross-Maffei Transurban. The system failed to come to fruition, and the TTC began to build the line for CLRV streetcars. But the ICTS system was used instead. This change was made after construction had been commenced. Ontario wanted to develop and promote its new technology, which was originally designed for the proposed Urban GO transit service known as GO ALRT. Changes to the railway regulations had made the new system unnecessary for GO, and so the government hoped to sell it to other transit services in order to recoup its investment. There were also plans for an Etobicoke RT running from Kipling Station to Pearson Airport to York University, but the line was never built. The Scarborough RT opened in March 1985. 3 years after it opened, the TTC renovated its southwestern terminals at Kennedy Station because the loop turnaround track, originally designed for unidirectional streetcars under the earlier plan and not needed for bidirectional ICTS trains, was causing derailments. It was placed with a single terminal track, and the station was thus quasi-Spanish solution, with one side for boarding and another side for alighting, though the boarding side was also used for alighting during off-peak hours and weekends. The trains operated were developed by the Urban Transit Development Corporation, UTDC, then an Ontario Crown Corporation, but now a diversion of the Bombardier Transportation. One unusual feature of the ICTS cars is that they are driven by linear induction motors. Instead of using conventional motors to turn the wheels, they push themselves along the route using alternative flat magnets, reacting with the distinctive demagnetic aluminum metal plate that turns down the center of the tracks. This system requires very few moving parts and therefore leads to lower maintenance costs. When the car motors are accelerating, they actually lift the car off the track at an extremely small distance, repelling against the white aluminum plate in the center of the track. This micro-lifting prevents the truck wheels from making a solid electrical contact with the track. Instead of using conventional method, in which motive power is supplied by a single third rail, with return current traveling through the running rails, A separate positive and negative power rail are provided on one side of the track. The trains are also available to be operated exclusively by computers using standard electric Lawrence's CellTrack IS system. However, due to new union opposition and public perception, operators were retained. The Scarborough RT have only one operator, unlike TTC subway trains, which carry both a guard and operates the train doors and an operator who drives. In practice, the Scarborough RT trains drive themselves. The operator monitors their operations and controls the doors. The Transit Workers Union has firmly opposed driverless trains.
Arriving at Lawrence Station.
Between 1986 and 1989, the UTDC H6 subway cars were being built and delivered. All cars have been based off of the Greenwood their entire lives and therefore only provided service on the Bloor-Danforth line. The contract for these cars was awarded in December 30th, 1983 at the unit price of $1,147,500. The first cars was completed in February 1986 after tests and troubleshooting. The first cars were completed in February 1986 and after tests and troubleshooting entered service on May 26, 1987. At the same year, the North York Centre station was added between Sheppard and Finch Station. It was the 90s, and the TTC was ready to retire their first set of trains. The Gloucester trains that entered service in exactly 60 years ago when the TTC opened the Yonge line. They lasted service until the Cancar Rail H6 cars entered service in 1988-89 and displaced them. The last set made its final run on October 6, 1990. 4 sets of cars, including 3 aluminum G2 sets, were converted to work train service, being retired almost 2 decades later. Most retired cars were scrapped by early 1991. The last time something dramatic happened on the TTC was 1976, when a train was set on fire at Christie Station, damaging the platform and the train. But on August 11th, 1995, Toronto's excellent subway safety record was burnt.
Good evening. All day long, deep underground, they worked at the site of Canada's worst subway disaster, looking for clues, hoping for answers. But it's still not known why 2 subway trains collided Friday evening. 3 people lost their lives in the twisted wreck. More than 30 people were injured.
More than 48 hours later, at the crash site, there are a few flowers. Nearby, a huge air conditioner is hooked up to the subway tunnel. And inside, workers are trying to clear the wreckage amid rumor and speculation about the cause. Did subway signals go wrong, or was it because the driver was new on the job?
Your eyes, sir. Your eyes.
Whatever happened, 2 trains carrying hundreds of people crashed underground. A rush-hour ride home turned into a deadly urban nightmare.
Worst disaster in TTC history that I can think of. And it's left people pretty shaken.
For 8 hours, in the heat and humidity of a Toronto night, rescue workers pulled out survivors. Doctors crawled into wrecked cars to amputate legs of people caught in twisted metal. Then around midnight, an ambulance pulled away from the tunnel, empty. There were no more survivors. Around Saturday at 3 a.m., rescue workers brought the last body to the surface at the DuPont subway station. The coroner has called an inquest.
At 6:02 p.m. on August 11th, 1995, a subway train running southbound on the Yonge University Spadina line ran into the rail of a stationary train halfway between St. Clair West and DuPont stations. There were between 200 to 300 passengers on the two trains, of whom 3 were killed and 30 taken to hospital with injuries. About 100 more later filed injury claims against the TTC. Many of the seriously injured were extracted from the twisted remains of the most damaged subway cars by rescue workers who worked through the evening under extreme hot and humid conditions. Of the 4 crew members, 3 were taken to hospital with injuries. It remains the deadliest subway accident in Canadian history. However, at the same year, new subway cars were being delivered. The TTC Bombardier T1. Between July and December 1990, car 5796 was modified by UTDC as a mock-up prototype for the T1 subway cars. The interior was redone with a red and gray color scheme. Seats were arranged with a perimeter layout and door partition positioned to the dimensions of the T1 cars. The seating arrangement was later revised to that used on the T1 cars. The TTC negotiated a contract with Bombardier for an order of 216 cars in December 1993. These would be enough to replace the M1 and H1 cars, with 20 new cars in the preparation of the extension to Downsview on the Yonge University Spadina line. 2 T1 cars with unfinished interiors were delivered for testing in 1995. The first 6-car train was to be delivered in August 1995 for further testing, but due to delays arriving in October and November. The train entered service on March 11, 1996. There were new features to the new subways: wider side doors, area for wheelchair, synthetic wool seat inserts, single T handle control, revised operator console, car to wayside radio based communication system, 3-phase alternating current and traction motors, and new door chimes. At the same year, the Spadina expansion was opened, adding 1 new station, Downsview. After that, the M1s were assigned to rush hour service later on their lives and began retiring in October 1998, while after many of the younger H1 cars had been retired due to the new Bombardier T1 deliveries. The H1 cars were also used more heavily than the M1 cars. The last M1 cars were retired in early May 1999. Fleet numbers for this retired series were reused for the new Bombardier T1 subway cars. The Gloucester fleet numbers were also used as well after they retired. The last 12 remaining H1 cars were retired on November 29, 1999. The last of the cars were removed from the property in 2000, with the exception of those converted to work train service. All of the H2 cars were retired in 2001. None became work train service cars. Because of the arrival of the Bombardier T1s, it was decided that a new line from Shepherd Avenue from Yonge Street to Don Mills Road should be built. The Shepherd Subway was introduced in 1985 as a part of the TTC's Network 2011 plan. The first phase would be built between Yonge Street and Victoria Park Avenue at the cost of $536 million. Extensions would make it east to Scarborough Centre and west to the Spadina Subway. Construction of the Shepherd Subway was approved in 1994, in addition to a subway under Eglinton Avenue. However, in the midst of a recession, the Shepherd Subway would only be built to Don Mills Road as a cost savings measure. The official groundbreaking on the line took place on June 23, 1994. In 1995, the newly elected Progressive Conservative Party cut capital funding to the TTC. The Eglinton Subway, which also had begun construction, was cancelled, but the Shepherd Subway was allowed to continue. Two boring machines named Rock and Roll from Lovat Tunnel Equipment began boring in 1997. The first stage from the tunnel began at Leslie Street and ending just east of Yonge Street. The second stage began at Leslie Street and ended at Don Mills Road. The Shepherd Subway officially opened on November 22, 2002. The final cost of the Shepherd Subway was $973 million. Shepherd Station changed its name to Shepherd Yonge Station due to extension. Stations are built to take the TTC standard subway trains of 623-meter cars eventually, but part of each platform has been blocked off since only 4-car trains are needed to carry the amount of traffic the line receives. The line was designed in a way that it can be extended at both ends, allowing for the construction of the originally planned westward and east branches in the future. Likewise, the Shepherd Line level of Shepherd Yonge Station is constructed as a Refton Spanish solution station to anticipate increased ridership. The line has been derided as a subway to nowhere or a stubway. Apart from Shepherd Yonge and Don Mills terminals, its stations have received relatively little use, even during rush hour. The total ridership of the Shepherd Subway line is approximately 46,000 per average weekendly, similar to a few of the TTC's busy streetcars and bus routes. Though these routes are generally much longer than Shepherd's 5.5 kilometer length. One significant problem is that the Shepherd line feeds into the already overcrowding Yonge segment of the Yonge University Spadina line, since the Shepherd line does not have its own train yard and does not continue west to the Spadina segment of the line. During the TTC's Toronto's 2008 budget crisis, the TTC considered shutting down the line on weekends or entirely. As part of Mayor Rob Ford's vision for transit in Toronto, he brought back the idea of expanding the Shepherd Subway westward to Downsview and eastward to Scarborough Centre. In March 2011, the Commission looked to Toronto's Transit Infrastructure Limited consultant sector to the TTC to work on a public-private partnership to find and build the extensions. At the end of the month, the plan was unveiled to extend the Shepherd Subway at a cost of $4.2 billion. However, there was no firm plan on how to fund the extensions. On August 17, 2011, Premier Dalton McGuinty announced Mayor Rob Ford had asked him to provide up to $650 million towards a Shepherd Line extension if there were funds left over from the money committed to the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. A revised figure placed the cost of a Shepherd extension at approximately $4.7 billion. Extending the Shepherd subway relied on available funding and council approval. After TTC Chair Karen Stinn's Transit City Compromise proposal was voted down by the Commission, she filed a petition for a special meeting on February 8, 2012, asking Council to renew their support for the Transit City Plan.
I rise this morning to submit 529 petitions from residents in my ward to support the Metrolinx LRT plan before us today. My residents also want rapid transit now, underground where it should be, and they know this plan is their best option.
There are thousands of people in Scarborough who want rapid transit now.
These signatures show us that thousands of people in the old city of North York who want rapid transit now.
Her pension had the support of 23 other councillors. City voted 26 out of 18 in favor of Stinn's proposal, which was amended to defer the Shepherd Corridor to a panel of experts. On February 13th, Rob Ford's executive committee voted to go ahead with the Shepherd subway extension. The expert panel endorsed light rail transit in the form of the Transit City Shepherd East LRT plan. The other two options discussed were a $3.7 billion extension of a Shepherd subway to Scarborough Centre and a $1.8 billion hybrid plan with a Shepherd subway extension to Victoria Park Avenue and an LRT to Morningside Avenue.
People hate the St. Clair. They hate these streetcars. You can call them what you want. People want subways, folks. Subways, subways. They don't want these damn streetcars blocking up our city.
City Council decided that a Shepherd East LRT will be built from Don Mills to Morningside rather than a subway extension. In 2010, new subway cars called the Toronto Rocket were delivered. The trains were designed under the production name as T35A08 before the name Toronto Rocket was chosen through a contest open to the public. The TR trains were expected to be delivered starting in late 2009 and start passenger service in early 2010. However, delivery was delayed by a bankruptcy of a key part manufacturer, Curtis Stores, which was to install doors components to the TTC's new subway trains. The initial order was signed in 2006 for the delivery of 234 cars, making for 39 6-car fixed trains. On May 6, 2010, however, the TTC voted to exercise a contract option with Bombardier for an additional 186 cars, making for 31 6-car fixed train sets. This would allow the TTC to retire the older H4, H5, and H6 series, and to have enough TR series trains available to meet future ridership demands for the opening of the Spadina subway extension to the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre. On October 1, 2010, the first train set 5391 to 5396 was delivered to Wilson Yard and was first unveiled to the public and media at Downsview Station on October 14, 2010. In early May 2011, testing and operator training began during revenue service hours. The trains did not provide service for passengers at the time. The TTC held another open house at Davisville Station where passengers were able to tour the new TR train again. The first TR train 5411 to 5416 entered revenue service on May 21st, 2011. On February 2014, 48 trains were available for revenue service. The delivery of all 76-car fixed train sets is scheduled to be completed by mid-2014.
Please stand clear to doors.
When passengers saw the train for the first time, they were amazed about the new features.
Well, they are faster, slicker, and roomier than the old subway cars, but whether or not Toronto's new rocket trains really are the better way to travel will be up to commuters.
It's out with the old and in with the new. As you travel, an active route map shows where the train is. Once you arrive, new screens tell you where you are and which way to go. The most obvious change you'll see on these new trains is that they are open from one end all the way to the other. It's called an open gangway, and it's the first for any subway system in North America. But there are also some very small changes, and germaphobes are going to like this: microscopic changes on every surface that you'll touch on this train. Nearly all of the train surfaces have been treated with an antimicrobial shield. Tiny charged particles attract microbes, killing them on contact. In addition to increased wheelchair and mobility areas, there are 36 alarm intercoms, 24 closed-circuit cameras, and 18 information screens.
However, the train had a few criticisms. In late September 2011, it was reported that some passengers with mobility devices were experiencing difficulties while entering and/or exiting the trains. The TTC officials noted that this could either be because the train was sitting too high in elevation to the level of the platform, or being the result of the train door's threshold, which was now parallel with the platform, and/or the number of passengers riding on the train. Another issue that was acknowledged involved a short delay in opening of the doors when the train pulls into a station. On the older train models, the door release interlock could be triggered just before or immediate after the vehicle came to a complete stop. But for the Toronto Rockets, it doesn't work like that. In December 2012, the TTC announced a demanding high-level meeting with Bombardier regarding ongoing performance problems relating to teething issues with the doors. However, the Toronto Rocket is a highly improved subway train for riders to ride on. Now the TTC was ready to retire their H4 trains. Actually, in November 2007, most of the 36 retired H4 trains were sold for scrap to the future enterprises of Hamilton, Ontario. 8 cars were converted into work service cars for subway maintenance. 38 cars remain active on the Bloor-Danforth line, mostly used for rush hour or extra service. By early December 2011, the number of active cars went down to 34. A tender was issued on April 7, 2011 for the sale and removal of 37 of the remaining H4 cars. The contract was awarded to the Future Enterprises Scrap Medal of Hamilton. No H4 trains ran during the winter service reductions, but 2 sets remained afterwards until the middle of January 2012. On January 27, 2012, the final H4 train ran in service on the run 264 on the morning rush.
They have rumbled underneath Toronto for 35 years. From Kennedy to Kipling. Kipling to Kennedy. back and forth, making tens of thousands of trips. But this morning, the very last of the H4 subways made its final journey. Say goodbye to the H4s and hello to their replacement. 35 years later, this is the future of transportation in Toronto. Unlike the old H4s, these new subways, called the Toronto Rockets, have air conditioning. As for the old H4s, a couple will be kept for maintenance workers. The rest will be sold for scrap. Sure, they were outdated and had no AC, and you would stick to those orange seats in the summer. But some are a little wistful now that they're gone for good.
The old ones were fun. They were fun. A little bit nostalgic for them. A little.
At around 9:45, the train departed Kennedy Station, out of service towards Greenwood Yard. This marked the end of the longest-serving subway stock at just over 37 years. After all the H4 cars were retired in January 2012, TR deliveries started to retire H5s. Retirement was fairly sequential, with many of the early cars the first to go. It was announced in September 2011 that 255 H5 and H6 cars were to be sold to the Echo Rail for refurbishing and use for a new LRT project in Lagos, Nigeria, and that the first car was already shipped. This was currently some confusion as to how many will ultimately end up in Lagos, as a large number of H5 cars have been hauled off to their future enterprises in Hamilton, Ontario to be scrapped. Later, retirees, however, have been trucked down to Buffalo, New York to a facility in Hornwell for refurbishing. Cars were removed from the commissioned property on low-loader flatbed trucks from Wilson Yard. The final TTC H5 train made its last run on June 14, 2013, making an afternoon trip from Downsview to Finch and back to the yard.
One last tour around the tracks. After 30 years, the city's oldest subway train is now retiring from the TTC fleet.
Train 5736 pulled into Wilson Station this afternoon for the last time, and transit enthusiasts got on board to give her a final send-off.
I'm here to say farewell to an old friend.
I have an appreciation for older technology. This thing was built to last 50 years.
And it could very well last that long. The fleet of H5 model trains has been sold to a new rail project in Lagos, Nigeria. Echo Rail will be the West African country's first light rail system.
I think it's a great example of, if something works, why scrap it? Why not keep using it?
Among those taking the last Toronto ride today, engineers hired by Echo to measure ride quality. The sale will generate more revenue for the TTC than the usual fate of our old transit cars, which was for scrap.
That revenue amount does remain confidential at this time because we did sell them to a private consortium.
On the return trip up to the line, technical issues were encountered with leader car 5788 at Eglinton West, which forced the train to go out of service and deadhead back to the yard. On Friday, June 20th, 2014, the last H-Series train, Hawkers Italy H6, made its final run and retired in the afternoon, leaving behind the TTC Bombardier T1, the Toronto Rocket trains, and the UTDC ICTS Mark I trains. On May 6, 2010, City Council approved the purchase of an additional 186 TR cars, which would allow for the replacement of the H6 cars. In 2009, the TTC staff was approached by a company interested in negotiating a potential purchase of the H5 and H6 cars. The parties involved remained undisclosed until May 2011, when media outlets reported on a visit to Nigerian officials to inspect the TTC subway system. The intention was to use these cars in Lagos light rail system, which is under construction. Ultimately, 75 H5 cars were acquired for the project, and the remaining H5 cars and all the H6 cars were being scrapped. The final H6 train, composed of cars from west to east, 5858, 5859, 5908, 5909, 5899, and 5898, made its farewell run on June 20th, 2014, with one trip along the Bloor-Danforth line in the late morning. The train entered service approximately 10 o'clock a.m. at Greenwood Station. With that, all the original H-Series cars are retired from revenue service, though some H1 and H4 cars may live on as worker cars.
Please stand clear of the doors.
As of this day, this is what the TTC subway system looks like. On March 30th, 1954, the TTC only had one subway line. Over the years, the Commission expanded the line and built new lines in order to reach areas that desperately needed rapid transit. What ended up was a 30.2 kilometer subway line from Finch to Downsview, 26.2 kilometers from Kipling to Kennedy, 5.5 kilometers from Shepherd Yonge to Don Mills, and of course, not necessarily called a subway line, but a 6.4 kilometer rapid transit line from Kennedy to McCowan. Today, the lines are given numbers to help passengers who are new to the TTC to get to their destinations. The Yonge University Spadina line as line 1, the Bloor-Danforth line as line 2, the Scarborough RT as line 3, and the Shepherd line as line 4. On March 30th, 1954, the TTC only had small red subway cars. Over the years, the TTC built longer subway cars and installed new features for commuters and operators. And now we have 23.190 meter cars with 6-car fixed open gangways, lighted route maps, and other features to make the system a better way. In 2 years in 2016, Torontonians will be able to ride trains from Downsview Station, which will be changed to Shepherd West Station, to the Vaughan Metropolitan Center, bringing the trains outside the city limits. Right now, the extension is currently under construction. The TTC is also going to have another line, not a subway line, but an LRT line called the Eglinton Crosstown on and under Eglinton Avenue from Kennedy Station to Mount Dennis, then later to Toronto Pearson Airport. It is said that the line will be open in 2020 and the route will be number 5. Right now, the crosstown is currently under construction. The TTC already voted for the Shepherd East LRT line, but the TTC also have other proposals for future subways and LRT lines, such as the Etobicoke Finch West LRT on Finch Avenue West from Humber College to the newly constructed Finch West Station to the current Finch Station. A Bloor-Danforth line extension from Kennedy to Shepherd Avenue East, meeting the Shepherd East LRT and closing the Scarborough RT, which is almost 30 years old. A Yonge line extension from Finch Station to to Richmond Hill, and a downtown relief line to tune down the congestion on the Yonge portion of the Yonge University Spadina line. These proposals will be able to make people travel faster from point A to point B. And that is what the Toronto subway system is all about. It's about caring. It's about reaching out to people who have to rely on crowded buses and streetcars in order to get where they want to go. Even though the TTC is not 100% every day, city councillors and the province of Ontario always find solutions to make the TTC a better way. And when we come home after a hard day at work or at school, we once in a while reflect about what would happen if we lived in a time when we desperately need a subway in the city of Toronto, in the province of Ontario, in the lovely country of Canada.
Now have you heard what's going on in Toronto? They're digging deeper, deeper, deeper every day. Store proprietors are raving while they're tearing up the paving. The racket is nerve-wracking, so they say. And though the noise may be distressing, still construction is progressing, and we can't afford a further delay. So with the help of you and me and the blessed TTC, we'll soon have a real subway.
Yes, we're gonna have a subway in Toronto. We gotta get the working man on pronto. So bear the noise with a smile, and in a little while we'll be riding in the new subway.
Now it's generally conceded that a subway here is needed, for the people have to get to work each day. We have men in Deseronto, girls who live in North Toronto, and to all of them we have just this to say. Modern history's in the making with this hallowed undertaking, and Rome wasn't built in a day. You may find it's aggravating, but be sure it's worth the waiting, for we'll soon have a real subway.
Yes, we're gonna have a subway in Toronto. We've gotta get the working man on pronto. So bear the noise with a smile, and in a little while we'll be riding in the new subway.
Now with modern engineering, dear old Yonge Street's disappearing. By the truckload they are hauling it away.
Take it away!
Excavation so extensive will doubtless be expensive, but who cares about expenses anyway?
Anyway.
Though we may have open Sundays, there are plenty of blue Mondays when the pile drivers start every day.
The workmen do the swearing,
while the public do the staring, and we'll soon have a real subway.
Yes, sir. Yes, we're gonna have a subway in Toronto. We gotta get the working man on pronto. So bear the noise with a smile, and in a little while we'll be riding in the new subway. Don't take a streetcar, riding in the new subway.